Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. It's been an interesting week behind the scenes. I started to do a lot of testing on the MiSTer FPGA platform. I think that's really neat. I think some of the cores like Genesis are absolutely playable and you could totally use one of those right now and have a decent experience. Some of the other ones like X6800 are still pretty much brand new, so I'm not really sure how in-depth you can get with those. I could barely even get games to boot on some of the other ones. And the arcade cores, so like the early 80s Pac-Man, Donkey Kong style, those seem really great. Those are in such good shape that I could say you could probably put one of those in a cab, and many people, I don't think you could notice a difference. Maybe, expert players might be able to, but I certainly couldn't. I'm by no means a Donkey Kong champion or anything, but just to give you an idea of what to expect in case you end up buying one for yourself. So I guess I would just approach any of the MiSTer stuff as a very work in progress thing that's always going to be a work in progress. And as long as you do a little bit of research before you mess with it and choose the cores that are already pretty mature, then you should have a great experience. If you go into it expecting arcade cores that are years away or expecting certain emulation to be perfect when it's still not, you probably won't like it as much. But either way, I'm super happy that I picked it up. And I got a couple more interviews coming, another hopefully really big video coming up in a few weeks. So I'll try to keep all my Patreons in the loop as much as I can for whatever I can say before it becomes public. But just wanted to give you guys a quick little update and definitely at least mention the MiSTer stuff. All right, starting from the top. Paul Ramos says, would have been awesome to say what's up while you're in LA. Yeah, honestly, that trip was booked solid. I didn't have one extra minute to spend. And in fact, when I was at Super Arcade, we were only there for like 20 minutes. We barely even got to hang out and play games. So, hopefully I can do a full LA trip soon. My brother lives there, so, it's certainly a place that I enjoy visiting. I just, with this trip, I really wanted to pop over, get a few things done, and fly home. So hopefully I'll have more time to do road trip style stuff. I really loved that idea and wish I could have kept it going, but I can only do so many things. I can only keep up the website, the news, the videos, and still do stuff like that. So one thing at a time, I guess. And Paul also mentioned that the arcade style that I was talking about is called showcase style. I'd never heard that before, so I guess that's just to reiterate where you have like a stand with the arcade stick on it, and then there's nothing in between, and then there's a big-ass TV in front of you on another stand separate from it. So that's pretty cool. I think for nostalgia's sake, if I were going to collect, I would collect actual arcade cabinets, but for playing, I think that would be the best way to do it because you have more space. A lot of my friends are big, both this way and this way, so you could have enough room to stand next to each other and still be able to play. But thanks for letting me know, and hopefully I'll be able to see everybody out in LA the next time I go visit. Daniel Yochano was asking about CSync on N64s. And I don't know if there was enough information in your post to answer this perfectly, so I'm just going to give a quick overview, and please let me know where I missed anything. But with the N64, the earliest revisions that can be compatible with the do-it-yourself amp, the even earlier revision of those have CSync already run to the multi-out. It should just work as long as the cable you bought is properly made. There should be some components inside the cable. Hopefully you got it from Retro Gaming Cables or Retro Access or even Insurrection. So if you plug that in, the cable is built properly, and it's not working for you, the next thing to try would be to just connect CSync from a point on the motherboard to that pin on the multi-out. I'll leave links to which pages are on the site for that, but it's pretty easy. It's one little jumper wire. If you already did the RGB mod, that's fine. If for whatever reason you still don't get CSync, you could just remove that cable and then try doing something like bridging Luma over to the CSync pin, so you don't have to get a new cable, just one short little wire. But if you have other issues, maybe it's the amp installation. I've had so many people email me about those over the years, and they send me pictures and the installation looks perfect, but they didn't use flux when they were installing it, so the pins didn't really get a full connection inside the vias, or everything looked perfect, but the wires were a little too long, so when they went through the vias, it poked and shorted onto a chip on the other side. So I would look for all of that stuff first, and then kind of let me know if there's still any issues. But that's pretty much, the rundown with it. I wouldn't suggest putting a sync stripper in anything unless you have a very specific use case for it. It's not that it'll hurt it, but especially with analog video, the least amount of things you have in the chain, the better. So, but I think that should probably be a good start. And let me know how you make out. And if if it's a short little thing, just shoot me a message over Patreon. You don't have to wait till next week or anything. The importer had two pretty cool questions. The first one is, since Analog's upcoming FPGA machine will be able to attach to a Sega CD, do you think it will be possible for someone to make an interface to connect a Mr. FPGA to an actual Sega CD as well? Yeah, there's certainly no reason why that's not possible. I think what might be a more overall a better thing to approach this as would be to just make a Sega CD FPGA. And I realize how hard that is, by the way, but if you think about the amount of effort and time something like this would take, if it takes 100 hours to make a Sega CD core, probably takes a lot more than that, but I'm just using numbers here, and it would take 20 hours to design and test an interface that plugs into a Sega CD. I would rather wait as long as it took and just have everything integrated right in it. It's my opinion that the FPGA recreations of these things are the only way that we're going to be able to experience these 100 years from now. Unless there's such a wild leap in technology. I always joke about being, plugging into the Matrix, but even then, while you're in the Matrix, maybe they'll be using, an FPGA core to when you walk into your virtual reality Genesis. So I really just think taking the time to make those cores and then open source, make sure they're all done properly. There's always people that could update and add things, and even weird stuff like the differences between different model Sega CDs. To answer that part of the question, yeah, I think it's possible, but I don't think anybody will. I think the efforts will be, and at least hope the efforts will be spent to make an actual Sega CD core rather than just a way to interface it. And the other question is, do you think it's wise to invest in a Mister right now or wait till there are more cores where a newer, more powerful model could be out by then? So that's a pretty easy answer. How much do you like tinkering? I guess that's pretty much it at the moment. I don't believe there's going to be another DE10 Nano, the Intel kit with the FPGA chip on it. I don't think anything's coming out soon. I might be wrong, don't quote me on that, but I don't think there's something coming out within the next 6 months. There's going to be tons of I/O board enhancements in the next year. There could be different forks of the project, there could be everything. So I would think it's safe to, especially for the price, just around $100. I think as long as you don't mind tinkering and constantly messing with something, it's a totally perfect time to buy the DE10 Nano kit. As far as buying the Mr. I/O boards, they're hard to find now anyway, and I'm really hoping that we could nail down a more, just like a more community-focused way to do that. So the kits that are out there now are great, but there were a whole bunch of changes and additions that people were talking about, and I'd really like to find maybe we just all decide on the layout of a board and then leave some spots blank so we could add stuff in after the fact. I don't know, but the short answer to that part of your question is I think if you like tinkering, it's a perfectly safe time to buy a DE10 Nano, and if you don't mind spending the money or doing it yourself, go right ahead and make the I/O board and RAM upgrade, except expect that will be upgraded quite a bit in the next year. So not sure if that's where you want to spend your money at this time. And just another thing to add on to it, I mentioned it earlier before I started the actual Q&A part. I would say for what I've played with, Genesis, I guess, and a little bit of NES, it's good enough where those, I think most people would be fine just kind of messing around with. But I don't know if it yet is at the point where it's a perfect replacement for a console. Some of those cores might be pretty soon, but I just at the moment wouldn't sell your analog NT Mini to buy one of these, I guess is the best way to put it. So hopefully that covered all angles of your question, because I love messing with this stuff, but I've spent infinitely more hours messing with emulation, messing with hardware than I ever have actually playing the games. I'm a hardware nerd at heart, so it's really just, how much you feel like playing with this stuff, I guess. John Harrison had a question about how I work the giveaways, and I'm so sorry. I always try my best to give the whole rundown of how this works every month, because I'm always conscious of and extremely appreciative of any newcomers that we have for the Patreon subscribers. So let me just go over it once again in case people are hearing this. John, you still have time to get in for the drawing next week anyway, so as long as you hear this before Tuesday, you should be cool. But here's how this works. The last week of every month, I announce something that I'm giving away. Sometimes it's things that people donate. Sometimes it's things that I have that I don't need anymore, which my friends very often make fun of me for trying to give away my junk. I promise that's not how I'm trying to do this. And other times it's just, people submit stuff for review and don't want it back, so I just give it away. Just trying to give back to the awesome people that are helping me out. So what happens is when I announce that product, I then I announce whatever that is on the weekly podcast, and then open up a page on the Patreon site that shows what that is, and then you just post something very short down below. You don't have to, even one letter, anything, just to get your name on that list of comments. Please don't post anything too long, because it would just take longer to sort through. But anything, I'm in, the number one, anything at all down there, and that will automatically get you entered. And then at the end, usually I shoot the podcasts on Tuesday afternoons, so I would say try to get it in by Monday night, and then I do the drawing and announce it next week on the podcast. I guess the reason I was maybe a little bit shady about that this month is because there are weird rules with Patreon, and there are weird rules with where I live in New York about doing raffles and giveaways. And the super short version is, as long as I'm not doing these raffles in order to make money, so I'm not running a gambling ring, I'm not, it's not like you have to pay for a higher Patreon tier in order to get into these things. It's just a basic thing. I should be fine, but Patreon says that it can't be exclusive to them, so I also offer entries through Discord or mail-in. That completely squares me with Patreon. And I don't know. I can't for the life of me imagine that the state of New York would come after me for giving stuff away that I'm not making money off of. I'm not like, all right, well, here's $10 a ticket and I'll draw a winner for $50. But I just want to be careful anyway. So for any newcomers listening to this, that's kind of the explanation. If there is a problem in New York, I'll just send it to an LLC in Delaware and have you guys, anybody that wants to do mail-ins, send it there. So it's not, there's no way I'm going to stop doing this unless something actually happens. But that's the explanation of what you do and why it's a little weird. So sorry about that, and thanks very much for speaking up and asking, because I'm sure there's other people that wanted to know, and hopefully they'll be listening to this Q&A. And like I said, you have till Monday night, Tuesday morning to get your submission in, so you still should have plenty of time if you're interested in that SCART switch, which is this month's giveaway. Darkstar7 wants to know if I could recommend a component to RGB Transcoder other than the Garo or Extron CVC200. I don't know of one readily available, but the Key Digital boxes seemed to work okay for me. I've used the Spider before. That was a cruise recommendation that turned out to be pretty awesome. I have not put them under the scope to test. I haven't done any real solid testing on them other than the fact that I've used Key Digital stuff for years, and they definitely don't suck. That I could guarantee you that. So if you could find any of those devices, you would have to make a custom SCART to VGA cable, but that's just a pass-through. That is not a converter or anything. So you would, component in, and then it would be D-sub out. You usually would have to flip some dip switches on the bottom. So D-sub VGA style to SCART if you wanted to do that. So, but other than that, I don't know of any other devices other than the Garo that are readily available that work well. Darkstar7 also wanted to know about the NEC XM29 and why some people have called it a gold standard monitor. So I owned one, and I absolutely loved mine. At the time, I only had a 20M2U PVM and that one, and I preferred to play on it. The PVM was sharper, that's without a doubt. It definitely had more lines and definitely was sharper, but just the size of the 29 and the fact that it was tri-sync, so 240p, 480i, 480p, and probably higher, but I never bothered. that was a big help too. So playing things like Dreamcast, or even watching 4x3 de-interlaced movies and TV shows that looked great. So, and light gun games, of course, the bigger the CRT, the better. So I absolutely loved it. There were a few things about it though. You had to be very conscious of the sync that was going into it. They had dip switches for 75 ohm or TTL. I left mine always on 75 ohm and would make sure that the cables I was using outputted that correctly. That in itself obviously has been a struggle for everybody. So that part should be fine for you now. But you're right, it does not support component video. And that's something that I never really had a problem with, because I would just use a converter. I think at the time I was using a key digital converter, just like I mentioned earlier. But that wasn't a big deal for me, and really the only console at the time that I couldn't have gotten, that I used that I couldn't have gotten component or RGB out of was the Wii anyway. But I don't ever really remember trying composite video on it, so I'm not really surprised that you said you got bad results. You said you got better results by running it through an old VCR. That, you know, by the way, I'm not sure if that adds lag or not. I know I had a friend put theirs through a DVD recorder, and that added like 5 frames of lag or something. But the reason is because how good composite video looks, and I'm definitely oversimplifying this, by the way, but how good composite video looks really depends on how good the filters are inside the target device. So you have something like a VCR, which, you know, by the time VCRs got towards end of life, a really good comb filter for composite video was cheap and everybody was integrating them. Whereas the NEC XM29 is built as a video production monitor, and it's really designed for RGB inputs. Everything else is just kind of like oh yeah, and we support this too if you need it. So that's probably why you get better results with that. But I mean, to be honest, you know, there's not many consoles left that you're stuck with composite video on, so that shouldn't be an issue with all of them. But all of that being said, the worst thing about the XM29s by far is the lack of documentation, the lack of replacement parts, and the lack of experience for people that have worked on these things. The reason I don't still own mine is because the original one that I had, the power board blew out in a similar story that sounds like you said, and it was the same thing happened to me. Like it went off, I unplugged it, plugged it back in, it worked fine, and then it kept happening again until one day it didn't turn back on. I found the only NEC repair shop that still works on these left on the East Coast, at least in the New York area. Dropped it off, and like 4 months later they fixed it, and 2 months after that the same exact thing happened. Brought it back to them, and 6 months later they told me to come and pick it up. They didn't want to deal with it anymore. They didn't even open the back. They couldn't get any parts for it. They didn't charge me. So, you know, if you start to work on these things, you have to just really be in it for understanding that you're in this by yourself. There's other people that'll help, and you know, of course there's basic science behind all of it. You know, you're not going to run into a power board that's never been, you know, the design's never been seen before, but it's something like repairing these is really expert only. The only thing that I would really ask, whether you decide to repair it, other people, take a lot of really good pictures. Light is always super helpful. Like any, you know, I don't want to give you a photography lesson, but even one of these $8 clip lights, you don't even need this if you're just doing basic things. Any kind of lighting, and even cell phone pictures are fine, but take good pictures of what you do, write down what you do, and if you need to buy replacement parts, write those down too, and submit them somewhere. You know, I'll give you an account on the site if you want to make your own post about it, whatever. But I'm sure you don't want to hear this, but it's up to us to really make sure these things live as long as they can. So I did own a second XM29, and it had a whole bunch of problems, and that was right when, you know, all that bad stuff happened to me last year. So I was just, somebody bought it, and they were 100% of the knowledge of what it would take to repair. They completely understood that this is a long-term project. This is not a, you know, replace one capacitor and go. And I gotta maybe email them and see how they made out. But same thing, like hopefully they got some good information, and maybe they could share it and pass it along to you. But we need cap kits. We need pictures of each board. We need, if a cap leaks and ruins a trace on it, we need pictures of that so people will know where to look if it happens to them. It's really just, you know, sorry for the rant, but part of keeping these things alive is really falls on all of our shoulders. So sorry, man. Wish I had better news. It's going to be a rough road trying to get that repaired, but when you do, it's a great monitor. And if you don't want it, let me know. I know a lot of people that would buy it from you. AdamW had a good request for a page about comparing 444 color versus 422, how it applies to the GameCube, how it applies to the firmware bug, chroma shift, and all that stuff. And to be honest, that's something I really think would be helpful. I just don't know if I'm quite good enough with the analogies for that subject yet in order to write a good write-up. Because, you know, for me, the goal is always to try to make it so that anybody with even basic electronic knowledge, we're talking just, you know, what a cable is type of thing, you know, basic electronic knowledge could walk in and read the page and at least grasp the concept. While at the same time, when experts read it, I don't want them to roll their eyes and be like, what the fuck, Bob, really? So I'm trying to find that middle ground always, and I don't know if I fully grasp everything enough, and as well as I don't know if there's an easy way to explain this without going super into detail. I think the best way I could describe it is that when you're converting between formats, it is possible for whatever the original format might be, so GameCube is 422, to look identical if converted to 444 if the conversion's done properly. So theoretically, it should be perfect with no other issues, and the only time you would get any problems is if that conversion is done wrong. So that's an easy analogy to make, but what it looks like, what to look for, how this can happen, why some consoles generate color in 444 while others 422, does it make a difference past 480p? Those are all things that I need to get into detail on, and I don't want it to be a 50-page write-up. I would love to do something easy like my 240p page. I think, you know, even experts would look at that and be like, all right, not bad, you know, you kind of got it. So, you know, I just always want to try to make things that everybody can understand that's a help, and I don't know if I could do that quite yet with these, but maybe when I finish up all the insane other projects I've been working on, clear my head a bit, and I could sit down and start writing again, that's definitely one of the pages I'd like to write. I'd also like to rewrite all of the Genesis guides too, so I think those are going to have to come first. Sorry about that, but yeah, great suggestion. I just wish I had time for it. If you think that you could explain that in the way that I just described, by all means, let me know. I'll happily post it or give you an account to give it a try as a post yourself, but it's just all a matter of time for me, so sorry. Eric Neil Ross said that he's just getting into doing his own modding and was wondering what kind of soldering iron and desoldering gun to get, as well as solder, flux, and all that. Well, I already have a page on the website that spells all that out. I'll leave a link for you, but the short version is spend your money on stuff that's worth buying, or maybe just pay somebody else to do it. Now, it sounds like you already decided to do your own modding, which is awesome, by the way. So don't buy a $10 soldering gun. Buy, like, I think it's 50 or 60 for the knockoff. If you think you're going to do this all the time, like, for example, when you say just getting into doing your own modding, if you're already into electronics and good at soldering, but now you're going to start modding and you're going to do a lot of it, buy the name brand stuff. Buy the good Hacko. Spend a couple of $100s on it. At the end of the day, it'll pay for itself if you use it all the time. But if it's something that once a week, once a month, buy the knockoff soldering iron that I use. You know, the only tip that I think I would add that's a recent discovery for me is I thought I lost my bag of soldering tips. So I asked Zach Voltar what he suggested. I said, you know, do I just bite the bullet and buy the Hacko? And he said, no, you don't solder enough for that, but buy these good tips. So I took his suggestion, and they weren't expensive. They were like $10. I bought good quality tips, and that same knockoff soldering iron that I've been using forever just doubled in its efficiency. Everything went a lot better. Maybe the tips I was using were just old and beat up or something, but they were the free ones that just come with it. So maybe get the knockoff and get the tips. I'll leave a note for myself to leave you the tips as well. I'll leave a link to the ones that I purchased. And same for the desoldering gun. I have the knockoff that works absolutely perfect as long as you keep it clean. I talked about that a few weeks ago when I ruined a Genesis because because I was looking in the camera trying to do it backwards, and I didn't even try to clean it beforehand, and ended up burning pads. Cruz fixed the whole thing for me. I don't know how he did that, but so just the knockoff was fine. Keep it really clean. Before and after you use it, they have these little poker things. Clear it with that. If you're going to do a lot of desoldering, get one of the gooder Hakko, however you say it. Get one of the good ones, and all of those come with great warranties and all that stuff too. So that's maybe that wasn't as short of an answer as I was hoping to give you, but basically, you're going to spend probably $150 to $200 in tools right away for even the knockoff stuff. But if you're only going to mod once a week, once a month, they'll last forever. They'll do a great job, and you'll be happy. If you're modding every day, it's more like $500-600 worth of stuff. But I mean, you'll absolutely see the difference after a few months go by. And if you don't want to spend $200 and you're only getting 2 consoles modded, just pay to have an expert do it. It's a lot less trouble. Porkchop Express 85 knows that his username makes me think of luscious pork chops. But since we don't have time for that type of dreaming, what's the deal with the Genesis bypass mods? Should the RGB pins always be lifted? Should the entire video encoder just be removed when using the triple bypass? Any install videos coming soon. So there's going to be an updated page. There's going to be an advanced Genesis video that goes over really for people that already know how to mod, so it's not going to be a beginner video, but it will show all of this. But to answer your questions, should the RGB pins always be lifted? As far as I have tested, I have never come across a model Genesis that didn't have jail bars, even after a bypass, unless you lift the pins. Now, the reason you lift the pins is because when the signals hit the board, imagine just a whole bunch of antennas all crossing over each other. So when it's on the board running past all those other signals, it gets the interference, which is what gives the jail bars. And by lifting them, removes that so that you just separate it from the board. I know Leon Kuryliuk likes to cut traces instead of lift pins. And that's fine. Leon's a great modder, so I always take his advice seriously. But from my personal experience, everybody's different, but I've found that I find it easier to lift pins than try to, cut a trace, and easier to reverse a lifted pin than cutting a trace. So yes, you could just patch that trace up. Sometimes you could put a dab of solder right in the cut, and that's all you need. Other times you could just rewire it, whatever. But there's one Genesis console that I screwed up a lot. It was my testing console. I was trying to beat it up and try different things, and I've lifted and put back down the RGB pins probably 10 times, and they're fine still. I've had other consoles like old Master Systems where you just lift the pin a hair and the thing blows right off the chip, but I've had good luck with Genesis consoles on that, just to be clear, not all the others. So one way or another, you should isolate RGB. Cut the trace, lift the pin. Some people say, well, why can't you just remove the resistor somewhere down the line? Because on most Genesis boards, if you have the chip here, the line goes all the way over, and then the resistor's here, so you still have all of this interference on the board. Completely defeats the purpose. Should you remove the video encoder when using the triple bypass? So that won't affect signal at all. But what I do find is that if you already own a desoldering gun, removing the Sony CXA chip takes like 2 minutes, as long as you don't do what I did and not clean the gun and burn the board. But crazy circumstances aside, use flux, add fresh solder, desolder it. Should just be a few minutes to get it out. What you now have are very easy vias to connect output ports to for a Genesis 2. So the way the triple bypass is designed is that you could put the Genesis 2 connector right on it, flip it upside down, and solder that to a Genesis 1, which is perfect for Genesis VA7s that have terrible audio. That'll be in the video too. Or I guess Leon thinks he found a way to use that so you could mount it on the bottom. That's fine. I've never tried that before, but if that works, that's cool. But the way Jose's been doing it for all the ones we've tested that I love is he removes the CXA, he mounts the triple bypass board as close to the VDP as possible so the RGB lines are as short as you can be. And then all of the outputs, the RGBS and audio, he just solders right to the pads where the CXA chip used to be. So it functionally works great. It's easy to reverse as long as you don't break it like I did. You could just, I have a couple others where I removed it, where I put it back in for testing and it just slid right back in. Everything's fine. So yeah, if you have the tools and ability to, I think it would make for a cleaner install for the triple bypass, because you get audio as well. So I mean that, and I guess if you're doing a Genesis 2, you'd be doing a triple bypass anyway. So now that that's going to be readily available, there's no reason not to, because you could finally cure that bad audio. So that's pretty much the full rundown for that. The only thing is, and I think I've mentioned this before, but I ran into one console where when I lifted sync, the console didn't work anymore. Put sync back down and the console worked. Now, that could have been a lot of other factors. That was a console that was used for testing. It was the one I used when I was burning pads by accident because I was trying to mod by looking into the camera and so that, maybe that was it. But when I asked Voltar about it, he said on the data sheet, some of those sync pins are marked input and output, which would make sense that it wouldn't work. So I would just lift RGB, but not sync. If you've done it on, if you took a Model 2, for example, you lift RGB, you remove the VDP, you install the triple bypass, it should be flawless. If you have any other issues, try lifting sync and see what happens, but I don't think you would have any issues. The only other thing to note, which I've mentioned before, VA2 and VA3 Genesis 1s still have jail bars that have nothing to do with the video encoder circuit. The problem comes from the VDP itself. So when you do these bypasses, you're amplifying the noise that's already there, whereas when you leave it stock or even just lift the subcarrier, it's way harder to notice. So the end result is it's almost better at the moment to not do the bypass on that. But we're still working on it. We will come to a conclusion at some point, and we'll hopefully have good data. So I hope that was a thorough run through of all those. And you also said you tried the new save state feature on the SD to SNES ROM cart, but couldn't get it to work. Are there any instructions listed anywhere? I haven't tried it either, but I would just try to find the developer that added it and see if there's instructions on that website. It's a Serial Wow has a follow-up to his question about image shifting from last week. So this is getting even more complicated, so I think I'm just going to take a step back and give a little general advice, and hopefully it'll help. First, you mentioned the RetroTech SCART to component converter. I have tested that. Steve has tested that. I've contacted the creator, and it just doesn't work good. It won't hurt anything, so it's not, you don't have to worry about it damaging your devices, but there's lots of issues with it. And I don't know if RGB shift is one of them, but the last time I reached out to the creator, he never got back to me, and I even asked him once again after that, where could I send the device back to, and he didn't answer that one either. So he's probably mad that we found problems with his device, and he's still selling them, which is sad. But that is one thing I would try without that immediately and see what happens. Try any other kind of RGB to component converter if you have access to one. The next thing I would do is remove any sync stripper at all you have in there, unless you absolutely need it. So the HD Retrovision has some kind of sync stripping built in, but that's different. You don't ever have to worry about those. I just mean in your RGB SCART cables, if there's any sync strippers in them, try removing those. And if you still have that issue, I really honestly don't know how a Sony Trinitron 1353 MD, I don't know how that would have the image shift. But if you want to get an Extron 201 or 203, they're Extron RXI 201 or 203, those will work. 202, you have to make completely custom cables. You don't want to deal with that, trust me. The only thing with those RXI boxes is you'll need a SCART to VGA converter, and I believe I can't remember which or what combination, but some of them required TTL sync, so you would almost then require a sync strike, which then adds another sync stripper in the chain. But if that's the case, if you put like a SCART cable without a sync stripper into a sync strike into the 201 or 203 RXI, you should be able to use the horizontal shift to move the image over, and that shouldn't add any lag at all. But those are getting expensive now, and it just all seems like a lot of effort for a problem that, it's my gut is telling me it's one of those things that you're using. So try plugging directly in to your the monitor and see if it still has it. See if there's a sync stripper inside the RGB SCART cables of any of this. I guess I would just, and I still don't really understand which display has the image shift. So I guess you said it's on both. So I would look into how many sync strippers are in the chain and go from there. So Brady Hartel had 2 questions. I love the second one. I'll get to that in a minute though. The first is he wants to learn how to solder, watched the Dreamcast video and thinks the battery replacement mod is probably a nice and simple first time mod for somebody. For that mod, the tools I would suggest are a decent soldering gun. If you plan on ever doing a second mod or a third mod, like I was talking about before, maybe buy one of those knockoffs. And definitely flux and then solder braid. So the only difference would be that I wouldn't suggest buying a desoldering gun just for the battery mod. So I would add a little bit more solder to each of the 3 pins on the battery. Then I would add some flux to the board and use some solder braid to heat that up and to remove the solder. When you do that, make sure your soldering tip is always clean. You want to buy one of, hold on a minute. You want to buy something like this, so you could always just dip your gun in and make sure that the head is cleaned. And just, make sure you heat up the braid, and you're probably going to use a lot. So you put it down, and then you move it over, and you move it over, and add more flux if you need to. And that should be able to get the old battery out. The new receptacle pops right in. That's super easy. You just make sure the holes are clear. Use solder braid if the holes aren't completely clear. Stick that through, dab it in, and you can't even put it in backwards. So that is a pretty good mod to do. While you're doing that, you should look into the controller board fuse mod. I was gonna do a follow-up video, but I forgot all about this until people in the comments had mentioned it. But if you hit it at the wrong moment, when you plug a Dreamcast controller in while it's on, you could fry the board. And having replacing the fuse with a self-healing fuse would alleviate a lot of that. So if it ever happens, you don't have to worry. So I think that's a great mod to start in. It should be easy enough. Just decent soldering gun. Keep your tip clean at all times. Flux and desolder braid should be perfect. And same link as I'm putting for the other question. Now, your second question. In your Dreamcast video, you tell people to be careful not to touch the power supply while it's on, since it's all out there. And then moments later, after I turned it off, I'm handling the power supply. So here's the thing, and here is why CRT modding is so scary. On that Dreamcast, if I pull the power out, and then I turn the power switch on, so it's unplugged, turn the power switch on, that's going to discharge almost immediately. I've seen power supplies with big capacitors on them. Might take a minute or two, but that's an extreme scenario. So it's usually instant when that happens. So, obviously there were cuts in the video between scenes, but yeah, you're right. One scene, I say don't touch the power supply. The next scene I took it out, probably been at least minutes. So for regular power supplies like that, discharge it, wait some time, you should be fine. And if you get zapped from those, it's going to sting, but unless you're already half in the bag, there's no risk of death. So I guess, I hate to give advice like this, but if you unplugged your Dreamcast, if you turned on the power switch after it was unplugged, waited like 4 or 5 minutes and grabbed it, if you're 99.9 to the millionth degree not going to get shocked, but if you did, it's not going to kill you. It's just more of like ow. In fact, I've leaned over and put my hand down while doing work, not realizing the thing next to me was on when I was doing computers, and put my hand right on the top of a power supply a bunch of times, and it just makes you feel real stupid and smells like burning flesh. So, but here's the thing: CRTs and certain other devices can hold their charge for years. So Jose told a couple stories. I've heard a few other people. I think Zach told a story too, where they went in to work on an old arcade machine. It had been unplugged and in like a warehouse for a few years. They went in, and when they used the discharging tool, I'm not sure if you saw the RGB TV video we did, but they hooked it up right, and there was just as loud of a pop as a TV that had just been turned off a few minutes earlier. So that is why I'm always trying to tell people that you should be very, very scared. Also, the amount of power that's stored up inside of an old CRT will, I mean, that could give you enough of a zap to do some damage, whereas a small computer power supply, it's gonna suck, but you'd probably be fine. So that was a great question. I probably should have talked a little bit more about that, but the video was pushing 30 minutes anyway. You know, I try to keep them under 30, even for the ones that are worth sitting there for. But the great questions, and when you're modding this Dreamcast, you know, power out, turn it on. By the time you go and set up your soldering station and stuff like that, you know, you should be totally fine and safe to grab that power supply. So thanks for the questions. All right, that's it for this week. As always, any feedback you have, please leave down below. You know, I really want to hear from everybody, and I always want to do these things in a way that you want to hear them. So if I'm talking too much, not enough, too much time on one, not the other, whatever. Whatever you guys want, post down below. Any questions at all. And for the newcomers, this is a Patreon-only experience. I make them available to the public about a month after they air, just because it's kind of neat to keep people in the loop that, for whatever reasons, aren't Patreons. But the questions or all the comments are disabled on the YouTube video, only enabled on the Patreon page. So any questions from last week, go to the Patreon page in which you found this video, post it for there, and I will answer next week. Don't post in any of the older Q&As because I don't go back and reread those. Like after this video is done, I'm going to upload this one and then not go back and read the last one at all. So make sure that any newer questions you always put in the latest video. And I try to do these the day that they go. So if you know, it's 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon now, it'll probably be up in an hour. So, you know, I would be able to get any questions up until now. So if you see one come out on Friday night and you left a question on Friday afternoon that I missed, I probably didn't see it. So just you know, feel free to re-ask again and I'll see what I can do. But as always, thank you so much for all your support. This channel could not happen without any of my Patreon supporters, and I really want to keep this going as long as I can. So can't thank you guys enough, and see you next time.